Astute Quotations, Part 16. The people who make art their business are mostly impostors. Pablo Picasso. All is common among us except our wives. Tertullian, 3rd century AD. A mathematical theory is not to be considered complete until you have made it so clear that you can explain it to the first man you meet on the street. David Hilbert, German mathematician. A beautiful theory killed by a nasty, ugly little fact. T.H. Huxley, biologist. Whenever a theory appears to you as the only possible one, take this as a sign that you have neither understood the theory nor the problem which it was intended to solve. Karl Popper, philosopher of science. It is not possible to write clearly enough to avoid being misrepresented by people who are sufficiently determined to do so. Karl Popper. Only great minds can afford a simple style. Stendhal. Corruptio optimi pessima, or the corruption of the best is the worst of all. Roman proverb. Thoroughly conscious ignorance is the prelude to every real advance in science. Physicist James Clerk Maxwell, 1831 to 1879. I did not think, I experimented. Wilhelm Röntgen, who discovered the X-ray. Patients rarely die of the disease from which they suffer. Secondary or terminal infections are the real cause of death. Sir William Osler, 1849 to 1920. I treated him, and God healed him. French physician Ambroise Paré, 1510 to 1590. Give my people plenty of beer, good beer, and cheap beer, and you will have no revolution among them. Queen Victoria. Any of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the street looking for another job. John Swinton, editor of the New York Sun, speaking to journalists in 1893. As for editorial content, that's the stuff you separate ads with. Lord Thompson of Fleet, British press baron. The leadership of the American Legion has not had a constructive thought for the benefit of this country since 1918. Senator Ted Kennedy. That which the fascists hate above all else is intelligence. Miguel de Unamuno. Imposing limitations upon yourself is cowardly because it protects you from having to try and perhaps failing. Vladimir Zworykin, Russian-American developer of television technology. As long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it? Boss Tweed of New York, who made patronage and corruption an art form. The best, or nothing at all. German engineer Gottlieb Daimler, 1834 to 1900. They make it a desert and call it peace. Tacitus, 1st century AD. The lust of fame is the last thing that a wise man shakes off. Tacitus. Led Zeppelin is just a bunch of stupid idiots who wrote cool riffs. Chris Cornell, the profoundly untalented lead singer of the inconsequential grunge boy band Soundgarden. Every Republican candidate for president since 1936 has been nominated by the Chase National Bank. Senator Robert A. Taft of Ohio. By the time a man gets to be presidential material, he's been bought 10 times over. Gore Vidal. To know the laws that govern the winds, and to know that you know them, will give you an easy mind on your voyage round the world. Otherwise, you may tremble at the appearance of every cloud. Joshua Slocum, the first man to sail solo around the world. A compromise is the art of dividing a cake in such a way that everyone believes he's got the biggest piece. Ludwig Erhard, German politician. When you see a situation you cannot understand, look for the financial interest. Tom L. Johnson, 1845 to 1911, industrialist and politician. The unprepared mind cannot see the outstretched hand of opportunity. Sir Alexander Fleming, developer of penicillin. Penicillin sat on a shelf for 10 years while I was called a quack. Fleming. He lacked the courage to be unpopular. Talleyrand. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell. Environmentalist Edward Abbey. When the shoe fits, the foot is forgotten. Zhuangzi, 4th century BC. The purpose of the New York journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his race and his country for his daily bread. Publisher John Swinton, 1829 to 1901. In the old days, men had the rack. Now they have the press. Oscar Wilde. Brevity in writing is the best insurance for its perusal. Rudolf Virchow, German pathologist, 1821 to 1902. I get my kicks above the waistline, sunshine. Murray Head from One Night in Bangkok. For NASA, space is still a high priority. Former Vice President Dan Quayle, a towering idiot of American history. It's wonderful to be here in the great state of Chicago. Dan Quayle. The better is the enemy of the good. Boccaccio, from the Middle Ages. Earth is indeed a crossroads in our galaxy. New Age writer Elizabeth Clare Prophet. More are taken in by hope than by cunning. Valvanarguas, 1715 to 1747. Tell the truth, and shame the devil. Jonathan Swift. This, by the way, is a recurring thought through the ages, so perhaps let's elevate it to a core principle of living. A lie makes no sense unless the truth is felt as dangerous. Psychologist Alfred Adler. This is not an invasion of Cambodia. Richard Nixon, 1970, regarding the Cambodian invasion that government officials were ordered to call an incursion. It depends on what the meaning of the word is. Bill Clinton, who gave Monica Lewinsky the one-gun salute. Guard against the postures of pretended patriotism. George Washington. The informed soldier fights best. U.S. Army Orientation Booklet. Peace is an armistice in a war that is continuously going on. Thucydides, 5th century BC. This war, meaning World War I, was a commercial and industrial war. It was not a political war. President Woodrow Wilson. The Christ spirit sat at that peace table. The great American psychic Edgar Cayce, advisor to Wilson, regarding Wilson's role in creating the 14 points. There will be no war. Artist Frederick Remington in a cable from Cuba to publisher William Randolph Hearst in 1897. You furnish the pictures and I will furnish the war. Hearst. Given the same amount of intelligence, timidity will do 1,000 times more damage than audacity. Karl von Clausewitz, author of the classic On War. There are cases in which the greatest daring is the greatest wisdom. Karl von Clausewitz. We are not interested in the possibilities of defeat. Queen Victoria, spoken during the Boer War. Wisdom comes from disillusionment. George Santayana. The best place to find God is in a garden. You can dig for him there. George Bernard Shaw. Trust in God. She will provide. Emmeline Pankhurst, suffragette, 1858 to 1928. Revisionism is the opium of the people. Chairman Mao. The common man, no matter how sharp and tough, actually enjoys having the wool pulled over his eyes, and this makes it easier for the puller. P.T. Barnum. There is no class of people in the world who have such good memories as creditors. P.T. Barnum. Never attempt to catch a whale with a minnow. Barnum. To do nothing is sometimes a good remedy. Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine from the 5th century BC. The best way not to die too soon is to cultivate the duties of life. Alexander Bogomolets, Ukrainian pathophysiologist. That's an outstanding guideline, by the way, and I think Hegel said something similar, either Hegel or Goethe. The irony is that Bogomolets was commissioned to study longevity by no less than Joseph Stalin. If any foreign minister begins to defend to the death a peace conference, you can be sure his government has already placed its orders for new battleships and airplanes. Joseph Stalin. Bolshevism is knocking at our gates. We can't afford to let it in. Gangster Al Capone. Men of most renowned virtue have sometimes, by transgressing, most truly kept the law. Milton. It requires ages to destroy a popular opinion. Voltaire. Before the gates of excellence, the high gods have placed sweat. Hesiod, 8th century BC. I owe all my success in life to having been always a quarter of an hour before my time. Admiral Horatio Nelson. The boldest measures are the safest. Admiral Nelson. The right to be let alone is the underlying principle of the Constitution's Bill of Rights. Erwin Griswold, former dean of the Harvard Law School. It is an affront to treat falsehood with complacence. Thomas Paine. Every animal is sad after sex, except the human female and the rooster. Roman physician Galen, 2nd century A.D. Once a man's married, he's absolutely bitched. Ernest Hemingway. The public be damned. Railroad tycoon William Vanderbilt. When I want to buy up any politicians, I always find the anti-monopolists the most purchasable. Vanderbilt. In every generation, there has to be some fool who will speak the truth as he sees it. Boris Pasternak, quoted in the New York Times in 1958. Keep the golden mean between saying too much and too little. Publilius Syrus, 1st century BC. Gossip is the art of saying nothing in a way that leaves practically nothing unsaid. Newspaper columnist Walter Winchell. I usually get my stuff from people who promise someone else that they would keep it a secret. Walter Winchell. To withhold news is to play God. John Hess, former reporter for the New York Times. Do not become the archivists of facts. Try to penetrate to the secret of their occurrence. Persistently search for the laws that govern them. Ivan Pavlov, speaking to Russian students in 1936. Don't oppose forces. Use them. Buckminster Fuller. Ride the horse the way it's going. Werner Erhard. When someone asks me, "How are you today?" I want to respond, "What difference does it make?" Werner Erhard. Never contend with a man who has nothing to lose. Gracian, 1601 to 1658. What a woman says to her ardent lover should be written in wind and running water. Catullus, 1st century BC. Necessity is an evil, but there is no necessity to live under the control of necessity. Epicurus, 3rd century BC. If you think about that one too much, your brain will freeze. Seek the road that makes death a fulfillment. Dag Hammarskjöld of the United Nations. Judge Crater, call your office. A stock line from many comedians after the judge's infamous disappearance in New York City in 1930. Get a life. Actor William Shatner of Star Trek on Saturday Night Live mocking a convention of Trekkies. Being a person of integrity is a mountain with no top. You have to learn to love the climb. Werner Erhard. I'm on the borderline of life and a greater realm beyond, an unearthly age of time. Charles Lindbergh, recalling his historic flight from New York to Paris amid the presence of spirits who came to his assistance. Where am I? Charles Lindbergh upon arriving in Paris in 1927. Where am I? Amelia Earhart upon arriving in Londonderry in 1932. Where am I? Wrong Way Corrigan upon arriving in Ireland in 1938. His flight plan said he was headed for California. Hey, we're doing a Corrigan. Curly, of the Three Stooges, when he discovered they were headed in the wrong direction. To rest upon a formula is a slumber that, prolonged, means death. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. A man's mind, stretched by a new idea, can never go back to its original dimensions. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., Supreme Court Justice. Why should we subsidize intellectual curiosity? Ronald Reagan. I am never upset for the reason I think. Helen Schucman, author of A Course in Miracles. To take offense is to give offense. Helen Schucman. Commerce is a cure for the most destructive prejudices. Montaigne. Peace is the natural effect of trade. Montaigne. Disrespect for women has invariably been the surest sign of moral corruption. Montaigne. Anyone who does not feel sufficiently strong in memory should not meddle with lying. Montaigne. A perfectly normal person is rare in our civilization. Karen Horney, psychoanalyst. The sewer is the conscience of the city. Victor Hugo, from Les Miserables. If you truly wished to find out what is good for the country, you would listen more to those who oppose you than to those who try to please you. Socrates. True democracy is the renunciation of the struggle for power. Socrates. Aggression is the expression of frustrated expectation of love. Ashley Montague, anthropologist. Curiosity is one of the permanent and certain characteristics of a vigorous intellect. Samuel Johnson. In the writing of other poets, a character is too often an individual. In those of Shakespeare, it is commonly a species. Samuel Johnson. No man ever yet became great by imitation. Samuel Johnson. It is what you choose not to observe in your life that controls your life. Lynn Andrews, New Age writer. You may develop into a second-rate Berlin, but if you insist on being yourself, someday you will become a first-rate Gershwin. An already famous Irving Berlin telling the unknown George Gershwin not to accept a job with him. A man of genius makes no mistakes. His errors are volitional and are the portals of discovery. James Joyce. Neglecting small things under the pretext of wanting to accomplish large ones is the excuse of a coward. Alexandra David Neal, Belgian-French spiritualist. Nothing is more intolerable than a wealthy woman. Juvenal, 2nd century A.D. Loudness is impotence. Johann Caspar Lavater, 1741 to 1801. In grave emergencies, moderation is generally safer than radicalism. Abraham Lincoln. That which is easy is bad for your inner life. Gurdjieff. All empty souls tend to extreme opinion. William Butler Yeats. I have never been lost, but I will admit to being confused for several weeks. Daniel Boone. The detective and his criminal wear versions of the same mask. Jane Roberts, psychic. Wars are caused by undefended wealth. General Douglas MacArthur. Sometime they'll give a war and nobody will come. Poet Carl Sandburg, 1936. Suppose they gave a war and nobody came. Title of a film from 1970. Rule number 1. Don't march on Moscow. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. He who rules the heartland controls the world. Halford Mackinder, geopolitician. By heartland he meant Afghanistan. Sighted sub, sank same. Naval officer Donald Mason in a radio message from 1942. Love and fear exclude each other. Macrobius, 4th century A.D. Your power ends where your fear begins. Barbara Marciniak, channeler of information from other worlds. The perfection of art is to conceal art. Quintilian, 1st century A.D. A man's bar is his castle. Archie Bunker. Damn with faint praise, assent with civil leer, and without sneering, teach the rest to sneer. Alexander Pope, 1735. It is presumptuous to think we are alone, meaning alone in the universe. Harlow Shapley, astronomer. Besides learning to see, there is another art to be learned, not to see what is not. Maria Mitchell, astronomer, 1818 to 1889. I saw that the universe is not composed of dead matter. Mystic R.M. Buck from his book Cosmic Consciousness. When in doubt, punt. Catchphrase of the latter 20th century. Society is like a schoolmaster who estimates students according to their conformity to a standard that is easiest for running the school. Philosopher Henry Sidgwick, 1838 to 1900. The average PhD thesis is nothing but a transference of bones from one graveyard to another. J. Frank Dobie, educator. Hofstadter's law. It always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. Douglas Hofstadter, computer scientist. And this completes Astute Quotations.